60 minutes as the designee of the minority leader.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I am so delighted to be joined this evening by women members of the Democratic Women's Caucus. The chairwoman, Lois Frankel, is here with us this evening, and vice chairs, Ayanna Pressley and Vice Chair Kathy Manning, and other members of the Democratic Women's Caucus, Ms. Sydney, Representative Sydney Kamlager-Dove is here with us this evening, as well as Representative Amelia Sykes. We are from Ohio. We are celebrating Women's History Month. And what we thought we would do today is to talk about many of the women who have come to Congress and have made history and have made a big difference in this very male-oriented institution. We just want to call your attention to this chart. And it starts here at about 1917, quite frankly, when Jeannette Rankin was the first woman elected to Congress. 1917, all the way back from 1789, he finally elected a woman in 1917. She served 1 year, not even one term, because she voted against the war. And where we are today. So clearly within 1 hour, Mr. Speaker, we don't have a chance to talk about all of these women. But I think that the women that we have chosen to speak about are women who found that they had the same profound challenges in this institution. They were highly educated, very intelligent, and yet they faced tremendous hurdles, but they overcame them and made a big difference in our institution. We're going to talk about Bella Abzug from New York tonight. We're going to talk about now Senator Tammy Baldwin from Wisconsin, who was a member of this body. We're going to talk about Patsy Mink and now Secretary Marcia Fudge from Ohio, who was Representative Fudge. We're going to talk about Shirley Chisholm. And we may mention a thing or two about Nancy Pelosi from California, who is our Speaker Emerita. Barbara Jordan, Lucille Roybal Allard, Stephanie Tubbs Jones, Senator Mazie Hirono, who was a member of this body before she went over to the Senate, Pat Schroeder, who just recently passed, Geraldine Ferraro. And we're going to talk about now Secretary Deb Haaland, who's a former House member, as the first Native American cabinet secretary, but also one of two first Native Americans to be elected to this body, along with Representative Sharice Davids. We're going to talk about the first Muslim women to join our body, Representative Rashida Tlaib and Representative Ilhan Omar. I would love now to yield to the chairwoman of the Democratic Women's Caucus, and I will yield to her, Mr. Speaker, as much time as she might consume.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Thank you to my great colleague from Wisconsin, Gwen Moore, for yielding and for organizing this session tonight. And happy to be with all my colleagues that are here tonight also. So I am very, very proud to be a congresswoman in one of the most diverse Congresses ever in our history. It is the most diverse. We now have 94 Democratic women, and we even have quite a few Republican women, which is great. And listen, I'm here as a mother and a grandmother as we celebrate Women's History Month. It's a time to reflect on the historic gains women have made and reclaim our efforts as we march to equity. And this is a time when we pay tribute, sister, I'll call you sister, I feel like you're my sister, to the strong, fearless, and selfless women who paved the way for us all. You know, when I think about it, just about every one of us here was first at something. But we know we're not going to be last. We're first, but not last. And in that regard, I'm going to do a couple of shout-outs. I want to shout out to our Vice President Kamala Harris, the first Vice President of the United States, who, of course, graced our Senate. And I want to shout out to the first woman of color ever elected to this Congress, Patsy Mink, who was the first Asian American and also the author of Title IX, which has meant so much for women to advance in education. And I'm going to also do a shout out to someone who was one of my very good friends, who I miss already as she retired last year, and that's Lucille Roybal Allard, a very proud California member, first Mexican-American woman to be in Congress. But, you know, it's not really their ethnic identity that I think about. I just remember, because I got to serve with Lucille Roybal Allard, her grit, her determination, the first woman, what we call cardinal, in charge of a woman of color in charge of Appropriations Committee, and a lot of battles as chair of the Homeland Security Subcommittee. And I know I just want to tell you what she left with. She left a quote: "One thing I hope is that the people that I have represented over the years know that I've worked hard as I possibly could on their behalf, and that I served them honorably, and that hopefully I made a positive difference in their life." And I will tell you this, Lucille Roybal Allard, if you're listening to this, you made a positive difference in many, many people's life. And now, Madam Chair, tonight, or Mr. Speaker, if I can, let me talk about someone who's a personal hero of mine. I should say heroine. Bella Abzug. And what a trailblazer. We know her for her hats. She always wore a hat. And she is a giant of the women's rights movement whose shoulders we all stand on today. Battling Bella, as she was affectionately known. She was on the front line of every issue of her time. She was born to Russian immigrants in the Bronx, and even as a young girl working in her father's butcher shop, she knew she wanted to be a lawyer. She went to Hunter College, where she was on the student council, and then set her sights on Harvard. But the school had other thoughts. They ultimately rejected her because of her gender. But Columbia University was much more astute. And she earned her law degree there, became a lawyer at a time when very, very few women were practicing law. She defended black clients in the South. She dedicated her time to fighting labor rights, tenants' rights, and civil liberties. She worked with the ACLU and the Civil Rights of Congress. She marched for equal rights, for feminism, environmentalism, and the LGBTQ plus community. She organized the Women's Strike for Peace in the 1960s. She brought together tens of thousands of women across America to protest nuclear testing and the Vietnam War. And in 1970, decades into her career, she was elected to the Congress, where she served until 1976. And in these halls, she introduced bills to remove troops from Vietnam. She fought for the Equal Rights Amendment, access to abortion care, funding for child care and gay rights, and she led the charge to make it illegal for credit companies to discriminate against applicants based on the basis of sex, race, religion, and marital status or age. Believe it or not, sister, there was a time that women couldn't even get credit in their own name. And then outside of Congress, Bella founded the National Women's Political Caucus with other feminist icons, Betty Friedan, Shirley Chisholm, and Gloria Steinem. Bella Abzug was a true force to be reckoned with, a passionate and compassionate leader who wore many hats, literally and figuratively, and fiercely stood up for her values regardless of political consequences. She once said of herself, sister, I think her description probably describes a lot of the women in this room tonight. She said, "I've been described as a tough and noisy woman, a prize fighter, a man-hater, you name it. They call me Battling Bella, mother of courage. There are those who say I'm impatient, impetuous, uppity, rude, profane, brash, and overbearing. Or whether I'm any of these things or of them, you can decide for yourself. But whatever I am, and this must be made very clear at the outset, I am a very serious woman." And she was a woman to be taken seriously, and she did not back down from the biggest fights of her generation. She did not give up creating a better world for her children, her children's children. And as women, members of Congress, looking back at her legacy, we take courage from her actions, and we will continue to fight to build the equitable world that she dreamed of. Bella never backed down, and neither will we. And sister, I yield back.
Oh my, that was great. Thank you so much, Representative Franco, for that. And I must say that from afar, Bella Abzug influenced me. I knew who she was. I knew about her creating the feminist, helping to create the feminist movement, and it empowered me as a woman. And with regard to Representative Lucille Roybal Allard, just let me say, not only was she, it was pointed out, of course, she was the first Mexican woman to enter this institution, but it's not enough to just be the first. She came here and she led the way on things like the Violence Against Women Act. She fought and used her post as a cardinal to protect the interests of children, all children, and we will truly miss her. She mentioned Senator Tammy Baldwin. No, she didn't mention Senator. She mentioned Senator Mazie Hirono. She was a former House member, now in the Senate. She went to the Senate, first Asian woman elected to the Senate. But she's also the first Buddhist who enters this body. And so diversity is important so that all voices are in this body. And we thank you, Lois, for lifting up these women. I'm so pleased at this time to introduce one of the people who's younger than me, but that I get so much younger than me. I guess people are laughing because that's really not hard to tell, but someone who inspires me, someone who is already made her mark in this body, and she's one of our vice chairwomen of the Democratic Women Caucus, and that's Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts. And I will yield, Mr. Speaker, to her as much time as she might consume.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thankful for my sister in service here, my indefatigable colleague from Wisconsin who leads on so many issues of consequence, especially in the space of anti-poverty and the stabilization of family and women's health. Appreciate you. I'm just so glad that we could take the time to pay tribute to the women who've come before us, who have kicked open doors, broken ceilings, powered movements, blazed a trail, been role models, mentored us by their example, and more intentionally poured into us if we had the privilege to serve alongside them. And thank you as well for your sisterhood and your mentorship, Gwen. Mr. Speaker, neither my mother, Sandy, or my father, Martin, raised me to ask permission to lead. I do believe that a parent is a child's first and best teacher. And instead of traditional bedtime stories of princes and knights in shining armor, my mother read me the powerful speeches of Black congresswomen like Barbara Jordan and Shirley Chisholm. Since my formative years, I have felt this soul tie to Shirley Chisholm, long before my work led me to this chamber. In fact, my first office here as a freshman in the 116th Congress was formerly Shirley Chisholm's office. Not only was Shirley, and I don't say that to be any way disrespectful by not referring to her as a congresswoman, but she is in fact so iconic that you can just say her first name and it is clear who you are talking about. Not only was Shirley a first, as the first Black woman elected to the House of Representatives, she was disruptive, she was brave, she was a trailblazer. In fighting injustice, she was an inspiration. Very often, iconic leaders can be singularly defined by one great speech and some powerful quotes. I think it is tempting to do that with Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, but it would be a disservice to do so. While certainly she was the first Black woman elected to Congress, the first Black woman to pursue the U.S. presidency, let the record reflect that Shirley Chisholm was an effective legislator in her own right, serving here for 7 terms, the daughter of immigrants from Barbados and Guyana. She has blazed the trail for every Black woman in this body, including myself today, as the first person of color and the first Black woman to ever represent the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the U.S. House of Representatives. Everyone, including Vice President Kamala Harris, owes her a debt of gratitude. But her contributions go well beyond that. During her time in these sacred halls of power, Shirley played a critical role in advancing policies that support our most vulnerable and marginalized communities. As a member of the Agricultural Committee, Shirley was pivotal in enacting the SNAP program, which helps feed over 42 million people each year. She was also one of 13 founding members in 1971 of the Congressional Black Caucus, which today boasts its largest membership in history, and she was also a founding member of the National Women's Political Caucus. Everyone wants to be a part of something when it's already established, but it takes a certain kind of grit, vision, and determination to be the founder of something. Shirley was both a visionary and a doer, and tenacious in the actualization of these caucuses, which live on today. And Shirley Chisholm was a forceful champion for the Equal Rights Amendment, a cause I'm honored to lead in partnership with my colleagues and movement allies in the House today. In her words, in the words of Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, spoken right here in the People's House, she said, the ERA, quote, provides a legal basis for attack on the most subtle, most pervasive, and most institutionalized form of prejudice that exists, discrimination against women, solely on the basis of their sex is so widespread that it seems to many persons normal, natural, and right, unquote. Mr. Speaker, Black women like Shirley Chisholm have done the work of preserving and defending our democracy for centuries, but for far too often, our contributions are ignored, erased, or rendered a footnote in history. And it's not lost on me that the first time the ERA was put forward, women of color were not even a part of the conversation. Today, there will be no erasure. We stand on the shoulders of folks like Shirley Chisholm leading a multiracial, intergenerational coalition to advance this priority. Mr. Speaker, when asked how she wanted to be remembered, Shirley Chisholm said that she wanted to be remembered as a Black woman who lived in the 20th century and dared to be herself, a catalyst for change. Today, during Women's History Month and every month, we honor women like Shirley, we follow in their footsteps, and we continue running, winning, leading, legislating, and taking up all the space with our full, authentic selves, just as Shirley taught us. May she rest in peace and power. Happy Women's History Month. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you so much, Representative Presley. And what a great tribute to a great woman. Let me just say that I am so happy to welcome to the podium, Mr. Speaker, another woman who's new. She's a freshman, but I tell you, she is a powerhouse and full of energy, ideas, here, ready to do the work from North Carolina, is one of our vice chairs of the Democratic Women's Caucus, Kathy Manning.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank Congresswoman Moore for leading this special order hour. I want to thank our Democratic Women's Caucus Chair, Representative Frankel, and also my co-chair of the Policy Committee, Representative Presley, for being with us tonight to celebrate this important moment. I rise today to celebrate Women's History Month and to recognize 3 courageous women from North Carolina who broke the glass ceiling and paved the way for future women in politics. First, I want to honor a true trailblazer from North Carolina, Gertrude Weil, a Jewish woman from Goldsboro, North Carolina, the daughter of immigrants who dedicated her life to fighting for women's equality, labor reforms, and civil rights. Gertrude led the tireless fight for women's right to vote through an organization she led, the North Carolina Equal Suffragette Association. In 1920, following years of suffragette advocacy, the 19th Amendment was finally ratified, giving women the right to vote. And following the ratification, Gertrude called a meeting at the Guilford County Courthouse to announce that her organization would no longer be the Suffragettes, but would now become the North Carolina League of Women Voters. It was at that courthouse in downtown Greensboro that Gertrude famously said, "It is so obvious that to treat people equally is the right thing to do." I recently had the pleasure of attending the unveiling of a monument in her honor and a mile marker at the Guilford County Courthouse, 102 years after Gertrude formed the North Carolina League of Women Voters. I also want to honor Eliza Jane Pratt. In 1946, she became the first woman elected to the U.S. Congress from North Carolina, breaking down the centuries-old barrier women had to overcome in politics. Prior to her election in Congress, Congresswoman Pratt served as a legislative aide to the 4 congressmen who preceded her in representing the district. She was known for having an impressive understanding of her constituents' needs and the district. Finally, I want to recognize Congresswoman Eva Clayton, the first Black woman elected to the U.S. House of Representatives from North Carolina. Congresswoman Clayton put the interests of her rural communities above all else, as she fiercely advocated for the Black farmers that her district and the state relied upon. These women were firsts in North Carolina politics, but they were certainly not lasts. Today, I stand before you as one of 5 women representing North Carolina in the House of Representatives. The legacies of the women who came before us cleared a path for other women to legislate, represent, and advocate for their communities in Congress. This Women's History Month, let's honor the legacies of those who came before us by committing to build a better, more equitable future for the next generation of girls and women. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative Manning, for that eloquent presentation. I just want to thank you for sticking around and believing that someday we would get around to you. I am wondering if, Representative Kamlager-Dove is still with us. Okay. Well, I am so happy. Yes, she is. I'm going to take her first. I am so delighted to introduce this new member from California. She has succeeded our former colleague, Karen Bass, who is now the mayor of Los Angeles. When Karen Bass left, she told us, don't worry, don't bother trying to miss me because I am sending in the best and the brightest from my community, and she's going to hit the ground running, and she certainly has been a great colleague. And so I will yield to Representative Kamlager-Dove as much time as she might consume.
Thank you, Representative Moore. And thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise with all of these other fabulous women in Congress to celebrate female trailblazers in Congress. And I'm going to speak to many of those trailblazers who hail from California. This is a shout out to some bad sisters. I am here to honor former Representative Karen Bass, the now mayor of Los Angeles. You know, you have to love the people if you want to lead the people. And Karen Bass, Mayor Karen Bass, loves Los Angeles. Stepping into her shoes in Congress has been an incredibly humbling journey. You know, Ms. Bass has a long history of public service, working in the California State Assembly before coming here to Congress. And in fact, she was the first female speaker, let alone the first black woman, but the first female speaker of the California State Assembly, an incredibly powerful body. California, after all, is the 5th largest economy in the world. And when she was first elected to the Assembly, she was the only black woman in the entire state legislature. She then came to Congress and eventually served as the chair of the mighty, moral Congressional Black Caucus from 2019 to 2021 before launching her mayoral campaign. Mayor Karen Bass is a champion for the people in every single way, leading the charge on foreign diplomacy, criminal justice reform, foster youth, and environmental justice. Karen Bass worked and works in a quiet, forceful, bipartisan way. And Ms. Bass found results for the people while she was here in Congress. You know, following in her footsteps, I support the same issues that matter to Angelenos and Americans across the country. It is important to note that her work ethic stems from her own journey. She was a caretaker, she was a nurse, she was a nurturer, she was a problem solver. She started her journey actually as a nurse. She eventually became a social worker. She got her degree in that. And then she started Community Coalition, a nonprofit organization that rose from the ashes of the 1992 riots, focused on equity, access, and opportunity. Karen Bass is now the first female mayor of Los Angeles. And she is the second African American to hold the position since the founding of the city. She continues to break boundaries and passionately serve the people, addressing critical issues now with laser-like focus, issues like homelessness, affordable housing, and increasing opportunity for all. Mayor Karen Bass is bringing a new direction to Los Angeles with a vision that advances equity and progress for the people. So I am proud not just to call her my mayor, but a friend and a mentor and a guiding light in the fight for justice. I would be remiss as a Californian if I also didn't pay homage to fellow trailblazers like former Congresswoman Yvonne Brathwaite-Burke. She was a congresswoman who dared to be the first woman in Congress to have and raise a child while in Congress. Or former Congresswoman Diane Watson, who also served in this very seat and was a staunch advocate for education. She fought against xenophobia, and she was a vocal leader on issues related to reparations for descendants of American slaves. I have to say that I come from a lineage of Black women in this seat, Black women who can't be beat. They are sheroes, mostly because they are ordinary women who dared and continue to dare to do extraordinary things, sometimes just by showing up, standing tall, leading with constitution, and not taking no for an answer. I am proud to be part of this group of women that celebrate the power, the female power, that comes to us in Congress in these hallowed halls. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative Kamlager-Dove. And let me just say, I knew all of those women from California, and I mean, they were California dreams, all of them. I just remember Ambassador Diane Watson became an ambassador, and she could take you, she never, ever, ever met a stranger. And she could stay up all night and all day. I don't know where she got the energy from, but she was a people person. And when she left, she told us, don't worry, I'm sending you someone great. And she gave us Karen Bass. Just like Karen Bass said, don't worry, I'm sending you somebody great. And we got you, Representative Kamlager-Dove, and we are very, very pleased. I am so delighted to introduce our next speaker, someone that when I met her, she was a candidate. And I knew immediately that she would win her race in Ohio. Just her determination, her resolve to do it. She didn't have a lot of people at that time who were saying, oh yeah, come on. She didn't have a big fundraising base. But I knew that she was resolute to get here, and already she's speaking up, asking questions, taking names. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, this is not the last time you will see Representative Emilia Sykes. But so let me be the first to introduce you to her.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you for organizing this special order hour so that we can recognize women who have led the way, who are trailblazers, history makers, glass breakers, and overall fantastic human beings. You may know, or you may not know, Mr. Speaker, that Ohio has elected 13 women to Congress. And these women have been incredible role models and leaders for girls and women, as well as boys and men across this country, but particularly for us in Ohio. And I'm going to take a few moments today just to talk about a few of those women, just about 8 of them, and starting in 1977 with the first Democratic woman elected to Congress from Ohio, and her name was Mary Rose Okar. She, at the age of 36, was one of the youngest women ever elected to Congress and the first Arab American woman ever elected to Congress in the United States. The next Democratic woman elected to Congress, you all know her. We all serve with her. It is the Dean of the Ohio delegation and the longest serving woman in Congress, Marcy Kaptur. Often she has been called the Queen of the Great Lakes because of her advocacy, but there is nothing that you can mistake about Congresswoman Kaptur that would make you think that she did not believe strongly in the people of Toledo and Northwest Ohio. Our third Democratic woman from Ohio was none other than Stephanie Tubbs Jones, the first Black woman elected from the state of Ohio. Unfortunately, Congresswoman Tubbs Jones lost her life in 2008, but I got to know her and my family got to know her very well, and her spirit, her passion was unmatched. And the people of Cleveland were the people who she always championed. And something that she said stuck out to me, and I want to read it to you all here because this is a great reminder for all of us who serve in this hallowed institution. She said that if they, our constituents, are willing to stand at the polls for countless hours in the rain, then I should surely stand up for them here in Congress. The fourth woman from Ohio I'm going to acknowledge is Congresswoman, now judge of the 9th District Court of Appeals, Betty Sutton. Betty Sutton was the youngest woman elected, and I am honored to take her seat, Ohio's 13th district in Congress. And Betty Sutton was not only a member of Congress, now the judiciary, but also local, city, county, and state elected office. Following Betty Sutton, I am going to acknowledge Marcia Fudge, a woman who certainly needs no introduction, who now serves as the Secretary of Housing and Human Development. Congresswoman, now Secretary Fudge, served the House in Northeast Ohio honorably for 7 terms, and we are grateful for her new position where she leads this nation in affordable housing for all people, no matter where they may reside across the country. Mary Jo Kilroy, the Congresswoman from Central Ohio, served 1 term, and she was a vocal supporter of the Affordable Care Act. And it is a fitting tribute to talk about her today, considering it is the 13th anniversary of that bill passing, and she was instrumental in a very important vote to ensuring health care for people across this nation. The first Democratic minority leader in the Ohio House, you may not know, Mr. Speaker, was none other than Joyce Beatty. She was the former CBC chair, most recently serving, and someone who I was able to follow in the Ohio legislature, but she is a towering figure here in Congress, and we are so excited to have her as a leader in Central Ohio. Shontel Brown, who won not 1, but 2, but 3 elections in a very short amount of time to make sure that folks knew how serious she was about representing the people of Northeast Ohio. She came from Warrensville Heights City Council to the Cuyahoga County Council to becoming the first Black woman to lead the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I am number 13. Amelia Sykes, representing the 13th Congressional District of Ohio and Ohio's 13th woman member elected from Congress. Mr. Speaker, as I close my remarks, I want to remind those who may be watching that none of us would be here, none of the women that we've talked about, without the gracious and tenacious activities of the suffragettes who made sure that we even had the right to vote so we could stand here in Congress to advocate for our communities. And I always like to talk about Sojourner Truth. Although she was not a member of Congress and although she was not a person from Ohio, she gave a very important speech in my district in Ohio 13 called Ain't I a Woman? And at the end of that speech, she reminded us that if the first woman that God ever made was strong enough to turn this world upside down, then all these women together ought to be able to get it right side up again. And that is what the legacy of the women from Ohio and throughout the nation who have served in this Congress have done. Get this world right side up again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing us the time to talk about influential women in Congress, and I yield back.
Oh, thank you so much, Representative Sykes, for that very enlightening presentation of the 13 women who have been elected to Congress from the great state of Ohio. Mr. Speaker, we have just about spoken about most of the women that we have on this poster board here. We named this little session a dozen women and then some. Because as you have heard this evening, there are many, many, many more women that we could have talked about, but we could not squeeze it all into 1 hour. But I would be remiss if I did not mention a couple of other women before we yield back our time. Senator Tammy Baldwin from Wisconsin. Senator Tammy Baldwin served in this body before she was elected to the state Senate. She was the first openly LGBTQ person to be elected to Congress, being her authentic self, not shying away from who she was, and still was elected to the United States Senate, to the U.S. Congress. But before then, ladies and gentlemen, Tammy Baldwin served on the county board in Madison, Wisconsin. And before that, she was appointed to the Common Council, to the aldermanic district because of someone's absence, and didn't have to face the voters because that is just how much they trusted Tammy Baldwin. Tammy Baldwin has a resume that is too long to share with you this evening. But let me tell you some of the things that I rejoice about. Tammy Baldwin was the key legislator that put the provision into the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, to allow us parents to keep their children on their insurance plan until they were age 26. And she did that because her own lived experience as a person who was in custody of her grandparents, and her grandparents were unable to put her on their insurance. They had to pay out of pocket thousands and thousands of dollars while Tammy Baldwin was in the hospital for months. And it's that lived experience that gave Tammy Baldwin a passion for health care that she brought here to this body. And now millions of young people who are struggling to get an education, to go to college, who perhaps don't have careers that have come together yet, can have health insurance because of the Affordable Care Act. Thank you, Tammy Baldwin. Also, Tammy Baldwin was able just recently to pass a bill that signed into law to provide for same-sex marriage, something that has been a controversial issue in Congress for years, but Tammy Baldwin, with her very soft demeanor and very understated presentation was able to bring together. Thank you, Tammy Baldwin, for being who you are. Another person who was not an openly gay person was Barbara Jordan. But Barbara Jordan really spoke truth to power during the Nixon administration. And unlike what we have gone through recently, her service on the Judiciary Committee at that time was one of the most powerful voices that enabled the country to realize that they needed to end this presidency on a bipartisan basis. Thank you, Barbara Jordan, for speaking truth to power. A person who just passed away recently was Pat Schrader. I mean, she was Miss Feminist. She was someone who kept things on boiling hot all the time in this body. She was very anti-war, and she ran on an anti-war platform. She ran on a platform of child care, providing child care for women. And she far before it was talked about, the environment. And so someone asked her, she was one of the first people to actually have very small children when she was elected. And someone asked her, Pat, how can you raise children and be a congresswoman? She said, well, I've got a uterus and a brain, and I use them both. From Colorado, she was someone who spent 24 years in the House. She was the first person to help to get the family and medical leave passed. And I think that was probably her signature achievement in this body. And after she left, she wrote a book, 24 Years of Housework, and the place is still a mess. So we ought to lean into Pat Schroeder and get busy cleaning up the house. I want to talk about Geraldine Ferraro, another person who was a member of this body. And of course, she was the first woman who was a vice presidential nominee. Yet another woman who dared to step into spaces where women had never treaded. Thank you, Geraldine Ferraro, for your fierce belief in women. And I would be remiss if I did not mention a few women who are still serving in this body. One is Representative Sharice Davids. Sharice Davids is one of the first Native American women, alongside Deb Haaland, elected to this body. And when I met Deb Haaland, after I hugged her when she was running for Congress, I looked at her and said, why the heck did it take you so long to get here? The voices of Native people were desperately needed in this space. And Deb Haaland, who is now our Interior Secretary and the first Native person who has been an Interior Secretary, these are people who have filled a huge void with regard to protecting the sovereignty of the first peoples of these United States. And I am grateful for their presence. I also am very grateful for our finally electing Muslims to this body. Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, Ilhan Omar of Minnesota. These voices are so important, particularly since there is so much debate around the world about Muslims and about their trustworthiness and reliability and about their religious beliefs. They have shown us that Muslims care very, very deeply about America. There is no two people in this body that care more about America than Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar was not only an immigrant, she was a refugee to this country. She is someone that loves America because we opened the door of opportunity for her. And she has insights that none of us can see because of the space that she has occupied. I give honor to all these women. And of course, I adore Marcy Kaptur. I think Representative Sykes made a great tribute to Marcy Kaptur, but I would be remiss if I did not tell you how she has influenced me. I love Lake Michigan, which I represented in Wisconsin. And no one is more adamant about protecting this great resource, our Great Lakes, than Marcy Kaptur. I mean, we have 20% of the world's fresh water, more valuable than oil and gas, which people spend so much time protecting. But we've got Marcy Kaptur to protect the greatest resource that this country has. Before I close, I just want to mention one other person on here that we have not talked about today, and that is Nancy D'Alessandro Pelosi. Nancy, as you know, was the first woman Speaker of the House of Representatives. And I would argue that history will designate her as the best Speaker ever. Just, when I was elected in Congress the same year that she became Speaker, the term after, in the 106th Congress. And I mean, by the time Barack Obama was elected, the first black president of the United States, I still couldn't pick myself up off the floor. I was just so overwhelmed by what it meant to have this mother and grandmother be able to deal with all of the different factions in the Democratic caucus and to bring them all together to accomplish our purposes here. I mean, we had the Blue Dogs and the Progressive Party and the New Dems. And Nancy D'Alessandro Pelosi was a person who could get the vote. You don't bring bills to the floor unless you got the vote. And Nancy was able to do it. Some of her greatest achievements was the Affordable Care Act, so-called Obamacare. And the Affordable Care Act has provided millions, 20 million people who were formerly uninsured with affordable, comprehensive health care. It is a big deal, people. And I know President Barack Obama gets credit for that, but Nancy is the one that got the votes. Nancy D'Alessandro Pelosi got the votes for the ACA. And I mean, it was difficult. This signature accomplishment is right up there with the passage of Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security. This safety net program will be Nancy Pelosi's greatest legacy. But after she accomplished her greatest legacy, she wouldn't stop. She kept going. She shepherded The American Rescue Plan, which saved many people, just got shots in arms during a pandemic. She shepherded the American Rescue Plan that kept people from being evicted from their homes, saved businesses, small businesses, and saved our economy. Thank you, Nancy Pelosi. Such a great accomplishment. But she didn't stop then. She got the bipartisan infrastructure bill passed. Bipartisan in a hugely divided Congress. This bill provided the greatest investment in clean energy that the world has ever seen. It has put us on track for meeting our climate goals by 2030. Nancy D'Alessandro Pelosi presided over that accomplishment. The Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act, again, supports our environment, but not only that, it provides billions of dollars of relief by allowing, finally, this Congress to negotiate drug prices for Medicare. One of the biggest expenses this country has is Medicare, a signature program that supports our seniors. And while everyone is complaining about how we're going to continue to fund Medicare, this Inflation Reduction Act, this ability to do what you do in capitalist countries. You know, I mean, if this were IBM or Dell or Starbucks or Amazon or any other large corporation that purchased as much health care for their employees as the United States of America does through Medicare and through the VA and through Medicaid, of course they'd be able to sit down and negotiate drug prices based on the critical mass of people that they're serving. But we've lost millions, billions of dollars protecting a rich pharmaceutical industry where Americans have paid 5-6 times as much for the same drug as people in Canada or France or other places pay because we were unwilling to deny the fat cats and the shareholders of that company undue remittance. Nancy D'Alessandro Pelosi, Speaker Emerita. You know, I ran into Nancy in the bathroom right after she had given up the gavel and yielded to Hakeem Jeffries to be our new leader. And I said, "How you doing, Nancy?" She said, "I am free." And she didn't leave. She's still a member of this body, still providing advice and counsel to our leadership. And she didn't leave here in disgrace. She is leaving with a storied legacy of being a great leader, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank you, Mr. Speaker, all of the staff who's been here to listen to the powerful story of women. When women lead, America is great. Thank you, and I would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9, 2023, the gentleman